Mr. Alex Dodd coming in, hanging out with us where sports meets life, kicking off the ACC football season. And he is kicking off the fact that he just received a very amazing honor out there in Rapid City. So I'm not going to say it. I'm going to let Dodd say it. Good morning, sir, and love for you to share with everybody the good news that you just received.
Yeah, good morning. It's always good to be on Wake Up Call with Dan and love being on the show. But you know, I guess last week I got promoted to be the sports editor here at the Rapid City Journal, and super excited for the opportunity and to try something new to manage a sports room. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, I mean it's an awesome opportunity, and congratulations to you for that for the Rapid City Journal. I don't know if they know that what they're getting in having you be the sports editor, but I definitely have known over the years that wherever you're going to go, you're going to spread a lot of positivity, a lot of faith, a lot of goodness, and you're going to do things in a really special and unique way. So I definitely want to congratulate you on that because there are people in this world that you root for, and you're one of those people, Dodd.
Appreciate it, Dan. You're one of those people too.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, speaking of rooting for the ACC, it's kicking off here very, very soon. And I was just talking about the transfer portal and, the fact that, some people say, well, the transfer portal is there and there's teams that are running or players that are running out into the transfer portal into collegiate free agency because the program's not good. The program's not winning. Well, I was just saying before the break, Alabama had a ton of players leave. They had players leave Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right after the spring game. Clemson has seen numerous players leave. So to me, I really don't think that this is coming down to, and obviously in these cases it's not, whether a program is winning, whether it's a positive pedigree, a college football playoff caliber team. It's not about that anymore. Honestly, it's just become a very individualistic, self serving world. And not that there's not those cases where a coach lies to a student athlete or a coach leaves or something like that happens, but there are these other instances where you look at it and you say, okay, Dabo Sweeney recruited these guys, Nick Saban recruited these guys. They come onto this football, these football programs, and Alabama and Clemson have a better shot than most of making it to the college football playoff when you start seeing a bunch of guys run into the transfer portal from these institutions. It really, begs the question of, is the transfer portal being utilized in the most positive and productive of ways? Or is this really essentially just becoming a place where if you find out after the spring game you're not the starting corner, then you say peace out, Dabo, and you run somewhere else? So I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I mean, DJ Uiagalelei, it didn't work out in Clemson. He's out at Oregon State now. He's come out publicly and given his thoughts on Clemson. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the transfer portal, seeing that the Alabamas and the Clemsons of the world are losing players, and not a couple, they're losing a bunch as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how the transfer portal has played out. I think it played out like a lot of people thought it would.
Yeah.
When you open up this door that anybody can jump into for the hope of a new future, you're gonna get whatever you want, whatever you could dream of in football or basketball. Basketball, I mean, it's even worse than it is in college football. But yeah, Clemson's lost a couple guys or a few guys over the last few years to the transfer portal. They've done a better job than a lot of other teams maybe at not having those guys leave after spring. They've lost some guys in December, but they haven't lost as many guys in March or April.
Yeah.
Or May. So Clemson's done a better job at keeping guys from doing that. But I mean, it really just throws a wrench in your roster management. I mean, it's hard enough to be a college football coach and to make sure you have all your scholarship players. It's even harder when you've got to account for the fact that there are going to be a few guys that are going to leave every year.
Yeah.
And if you're at one of these places where 10 guys leave every year or 15 guys leave every year, it makes it that much more difficult, because how are you supposed to go on the recruiting trail and get the right number of guys to come into your program, or how are you going to be able to anticipate how many transfers you're going to have to sign when you don't know how many are leaving your own program? So the transfer window, I think, helps a little bit, but there's still, I mean, it's not like the NFL where teams have to get permission to talk to other players that that they want to trade for. It's not like that. It's not like free agency. It's the wild, wild west, and we're seeing it play out every year. So it's interesting. I'm not the biggest fan. I agree with you though. There are situations where it makes sense for guys.
Yeah.
I mean, DJ Uyunglele is kind of an interesting case. I mean, he's a graduate. He's already got his degree, so that might be a little bit different. But yeah, it's interesting and not the best.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that there's not enough parameters, and there's no fence built around it. There's no fence built around NIL, and I heard a coach talk about this, and I agree wholeheartedly, of the reality that you can't have the opportunity to transfer being open right after the season ends when people are extremely emotional, and right after spring practice where people are extremely emotional. And by the way, when you look at scheming and whatnot, now I'm thinking as a coach, if I'm Saban and I got 3 guys transferring out of my program right after spring ball from Alabama, they go to Florida, LSU, and Tennessee, there goes my playbook. So, I mean, I'm thinking about that too. I don't feel like you should be able to transfer after the spring. I really don't. And this whole like play right away. So to be able to go through a spring now in a certain situation where a coach leaves or there's some type of very unique thing like a coach throws a chair at a player, I don't know, something just crazy, then I can understand that. But in my reality, once spring starts, that's the season. And so for you to be able to walk out of a team in April and go to another team and, be running forward on a kickoff in September, I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's good for football. I don't think it's good for collegiate athletics. And, if we don't want this to be professional in what we're, looking at right now, if we don't want this to be a professional model and we don't want this to be free agency, I mean, essentially that's what it's become. That's what it is. There's almost like a trade deadline, right? You come out of the spring and you jump into the portal, you're part of the trade deadline, and you get onto another team, and here you are, on another kickoff. That's something that I'd love to get your thoughts on, are these windows that we have, and I can't take credit for it because, like I said, another coach, a coach brought it up, but having these emotional moments at the end of the season in December and then having it at the end of spring practice where maybe something didn't go your way, or maybe coach yelled at you the last day of spring practice and that's the last thing you remember and you were embarrassed in front of your parents, and now after the spring game you're just pissed off, you want to leave, or you walked off the field at the bowl game and you feel like they should have handed you the ball and they didn't, and so you want to leave. These emotional times that are open to transferring, would love to get your thoughts on that. And if you feel like it's right that once we officially step into spring ball, which is the following season, if you feel like somebody should be able to leave in April and show up somewhere else in August.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely brings up an interesting point, and it definitely has taken away somewhat of what was special in college athletics. One of the things that was special about college sports is, as a fan, you knew you were going to have a guy for 4 years. You knew that he was going to be on your team. You knew that you could pull for him. You knew who your players were going to be, and that's just not the case at most places now. So that definitely takes some of the luster away from it. I do think the deadline conversation is interesting because, I mean, it's not even like free agency, because free agency at least has rules that govern it, and this unlimited wide open door that guys are able to go out of, and a lot of guys get stuck in the portal too, is another thing that people oftentimes forget, is just because you go in the portal doesn't mean that you're going to sign somewhere. You can go into the portal and never come out, so that's something a lot of these guys don't think about. I almost think along with some more structure to the transfer portal, that these schools need to have people who are giving these kids neutral, good advice. And I don't know, I mean, maybe through NCAA compliance or whatever, to just tell the guys the risks and what can happen when you jump in the transfer portal and don't sign somewhere.
Yeah.
Because, like college basketball season when there were 2,000 something guys in the portal, and there weren't that many spots on rosters because people are still signing high school kids, and they're still signing junior college kids. So that's another interesting part of it. But it like you're saying, with having guys be able to jump in these emotional time periods, especially after spring practice, when a guy's able to jump in the portal after spring practice, it makes a coach's job 10 times more difficult in terms of roster management, because you're not signing new guys after spring practice from high school. You can hopefully you can get your transfers before that deadline as well. So it's a mess, and the NCAA is. I don't even know what they could do about it, or if the schools would even listen. If the NCAA tried to add some enforcement, because that's a whole nother conversation. What's happening with the NCAA, and I don't envy those guys' situation in trying to tell, especially these Power Five, these
Yeah.
autonomous five conferences, what to do.
Well, speaking here with Alex Dodd, sports editor of Rapid City Journal, and as we talk about college football and getting into the ACC here in a second, you say you don't envy them, but they put, not that the new faces coming in did this, but the NCAA as an institution put themselves in this position. Their consistently inconsistent behavior, which I warned, and I said this, and I think now we are at 5 years. I said 5 years ago, within the next 5 to 10 years, we will see the NCAA either drastically change or cease to exist. And we're in a place right now, 5 years after I said that, where they have tried to put out a new constitution, figure out who they are, find new leadership, and are still trying to understand what they're supposed to do right now. I mean, they let things run rampant. They gave certain institutions preferential treatment. They did this to themselves. The California passes a law, right? And the rest of the country goes, okay, good for you. And then the NCAA says, okay, well, what do you guys think? We don't care. You're all going to have to be open to it. And at the time that I was researching it, I think there was 9 states of 50 that had some type of plan in place for NIL. And there was 41 other states that either didn't agree with it, didn't know about it, didn't understand it, were trying to figure out, what type of law that they could pass, what legislation they can have. So when you have more than half the country, I don't even care if it was 49 said yes and one of them didn't understand it. When the whole country isn't kind of on board with it and we're trying to figure things out, this is a question that I continue to ask and no one's given me an answer, and I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. If states have rights, how did the NCAA circumnavigate the entire governmental system in America and tell 50 states who have their own rights within their borders that they all have to abide by the NCAA when the NCAA is not the national government?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're seeing that play out very clearly right now. The NCAA is essentially deferred to the states on NIL legislation, and you're never in a good situation. I think I may have said this on your show before. You're never in a good situation as a nonprofit where you're going and lobbying the federal government to take control over what you allegedly control.
Yeah.
And that's what the NCAA is doing. They're lobbying the federal government to implement federal laws to control NIL because they have no say over what the states are going to do. And I mean, the landscape is not balanced. I mean, it's never been balanced per se in college football. There have always been teams that, have a bigger appeal, and, the rich kind of get richer in college football. It's never been exactly level, but there's always the possibility of a school finding a way to put things together to rise up to the top. And it's making that a lot more difficult now with NIL when you have states like Texas and Alabama where the schools can essentially fundraise for the NIL collectives and pay the players and circumnavigate the process of making student athletes employees. So you have that in some states, and then you have other states like Clemson can't do that. South Carolina's NIL legislation doesn't allow the schools to fundraise for the NIL collectives. They'd be completely separate. That wasn't built into the law when they shoehorned it through as soon as they possibly could when all this broke out. So it's really interesting. I don't know what the NCAA can do because of exactly what you're saying. The states have rights to adopt actual laws, and the NCAA doesn't.
Yeah.
And talking about the NCAA and their unfair punishment of teams, I mean, you don't have to look much farther than what's happening with Michigan right now.
Yeah.
And I talked about it on a show I have with Will Vandervoort that we do on Thursdays called Off the Cuff. You can find it on my Twitter. But maybe Jim Harbaugh would have been better if he didn't actually buy those recruits burgers and just gave them burger bags full of cash like Tennessee did, because Tennessee didn't get any punishment essentially for what they did. And Jim Harbaugh buys a couple kids a burger when he's talking to them, and he's going to get suspended for 4 games most likely. So
Yeah.
it's who's running the circus.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is who wants to, and that decision making. I mean, listen, it's not rocket science. It's just the reality. And I had a few issues with this. I mean, with it not being rocket science, you just need somebody who's competent. You need somebody who doesn't owe anybody anything. Essentially, the president of the NCAA has become a politician. They owe somebody something, so they can't make certain rules happen, right? We can't punish Kentucky. You can't touch John Calipari. However, we're going to come after St. Bonaventure in upstate New York because we think they're doing some naughty business. I mean,
and the president of the NCAA is literally a politician. Charlie Baker was the governor of Massachusetts, and it's become an office that I don't know how it could be held by somebody that's not a politician, because they need the federal government in order to continue to exist. All it's going to take to end the NCAA is a school bringing the right case before a judge to sue the NCAA for infringement, and that's how NIL happened. Was the NCAA getting taken to court,
right.
And that's all that's going to have to happen for the NCAA to completely end, is for them to rub the wrong school or the wrong group of schools the wrong way,
Yeah.
and for them to have a solid enough case to take it before a judge.
I mean, I'm waiting for that day, and I said this 2 years ago at least. I'm waiting for the day for the NCAA to say something to the SEC and the SEC to just do this. Are you talking to us? Did you say something to us? Because
Who?
I think the SEC
Who?
is on their way out. I think they're leaving. I've said this 2 years ago. I think the SEC is going to form their own league. I think there's going to be a college football playoff 1 and a college football playoff 2. I think the college football playoff 1 will either be SEC or SEC Big Ten, even though I don't think the Big Ten deserves to be in it. And then I think from that, and when I say deserves to be in it, they don't have enough selling point. The SEC with Alabama, with hopefully a Florida team getting better, with LSU, as well as Auburn, Georgia, Kentucky. I mean, they're expanding Oklahoma and Texas. There's so many things that the SEC can do. They really don't need anybody. And the Big Ten has preferential treatment into the college football playoff, but they don't do anything with it. Ohio State barely does anything with it. Michigan barely does anything with it. So to me, yeah, and bringing in UCLA and USC, it's just ridiculous, because I think about the Olympic sports. Are you going to be driving a bus for women's soccer 2,000 miles? Are you going to be are you going to be chartering field hockey? Because we know why they did it. They did it for football, maybe a little bit for basketball. And, I think what the Big Ten did, in my opinion from the outside, is I feel like if you look at a map, and I did a map show last year where I just broke down everything by actually looking at the map and talking about the conferences. The SEC is southern, middle, southeast. So you have that circle, right? And then you have the Big Ten circle, and they touch each other. So they have the north and south of the middle of the country to the east. And then when you go off to the west, they pull in UCLA and USC. So I think that their argument is, hey, if you let us come with you, we'll have representation from the majority of the country. If we can get Notre Dame to come in, we'll have all these SEC schools. We'll have Notre Dame. We'll have Penn State. We'll have Ohio State. We'll have Michigan. We'll have USC, UCLA. People are going to consider us to be the championship. And then there'll be a college football playoff too, with the ACC and the Pac-12, whatever Pac number it's going to be. The Big 12, which is now the Big 13, because they continue to confuse the situation. And, the American Athletic and so on and so forth. I think there's going to be 3 tiers. And you'll see in a show coming up that I had with an American Athletic Conference coach, we had this conversation. He didn't know that I had said it. I didn't know he was thinking it. And he said to me, there's going to be 3 tiers of college football. And there's going to be that tier where the SEC breaks free, at least. Then there'll be that tier of the other FBS, and then there'll be the FCS still. So instead of 1A, AA, it'll be essentially 1A, AA, AAA. And that's where we're going to be sitting at. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, Dodd, because it seems like the world is moving in that direction. And the NCAA is in a place right now where I talked to John Swofford about this multiple times many years ago. I said, John, your autonomy, that the name that you chose as 5 conferences, the Pac-12, the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, and the ACC, it's not a mistake that you chose autonomy, which is self-governing. You're essentially a sleeping giant in the midst of the NCAA, and at any given time, legislatively, you can leave. Legally, you're an autonomy group. Have you thought about it? And he told me flat out, yeah, we've discussed it as commissioners. We're not going to do it right now, but it's not that it's out of the realm of possibility. Well, here we are, fast forward a bunch of years. The NCAA's lost its mind more. The NIL is where it is. Transfer portal is going on. Pay for play is a normal thing in America. Coaches are texting players saying, jump in the portal so I can pay you this much money. I don't think we're that far off from seeing the world of the autonomy group, or at least a portion of it. And that's why I think 10 years later, there's been so much movement in realignment, because I think the Big 12, the Big 10 are trying to attract the SEC into letting them be a part of whatever this treehouse is going to be.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think you're wrong. I don't know if it's going to take very long. I mean, it could be the next 5 years before you start seeing this movement happen. I mean, you're already seeing it is the movement even done? That's the big question.
Probably not.
Because I think we got to a point last year where we were like, oh, maybe, and the year before, we also got to a point where we're like, oh, maybe this movement's kind of done. But are we done? Are we even done in this cycle with the realignment in college football? And I'm not so sure that we are. I mean, you got to think about these schools that are in the ACC, or even worse, these schools that are in the Pac-12. They're looking at the revenue numbers, and they're seeing what the Big Ten schools are getting. And you're seeing what the SEC schools are going to get from ESPN with Oklahoma and Texas. And it's just, the discrepancy is too much for these athletic directors to wrap their minds around. And yeah, there's things that make the ACC different than the Big Ten. There are things that make the ACC different than the SEC. But do schools care as much about these intangible things, or do they want to see the dollars on paper to better their entire athletic department? And I think I don't know if the Big Ten is quite done with the moves it's going to try to make. I think that the Big 12, adding Colorado, adding BYU, I think the Big 12 has done its best job to try to stay relevant. And in this future second tier, by adding the schools that they did, they're not Oklahoma and Texas. You didn't add those big names. Those are the ones you lost. But you were able to add a Colorado team that has some traditional ties to the region. You were able to add a BYU team that's had success in the past. They have the history, but they also have a really big fan base that's going to watch their games every week. So I think that was a good move by the Big 12. But I think we're definitely heading towards a multi-tiered college football system. I mean, even the Power 5 is not going to be a thing in 5 or 6 years or 10 years. It could take longer than we think it is. I mean, we're always doom and gloom, I guess, as sports writers, waiting for the next thing to happen. But we're definitely moving in that direction. Yeah. The question is, how long is it going to take? How much longer can schools continue to bite the bullet of making half of what schools in another conference are before they become irrelevant in this conversation? When the SEC is going to be able to have teams with 2 losses or 3 losses making the college football playoff when it expands, because that's what's going to happen. I mean, we all saw the schedules for 2024 in the SEC, and you can't tell me that if Alabama loses to Oklahoma and to LSU, that they're not going to still be in the conversation to make an expanded playoff, because that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And in these other conferences like the ACC, where you're not going to be playing those games, you're still in the same situation with making the playoff that you were before. You have room to lose one game. Maybe you have room to lose two games if those two games are Notre Dame and Florida State or Notre Dame and Clemson or
Yeah.
whatever. Maybe that's the room you have to lose two close games. But that margin for error in those Power Two conferences that we're talking about
Yeah.
is getting thinner.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So what are these other schools going to do to keep up?
yeah, I mean, and you bring up that, and I mean, I spoke with North Carolina Tar Heels head football coach Mac Brown, and I asked him, and I said, where, you've been in this conference more than once, and you have been a sports analyst looking at this conference from that viewfinder. What are your thoughts on the state of the ACC? And he said repeatedly, we need more money. I mean, when Mac Brown in North Carolina, when an integral piece of your identity is saying, we need to figure out how to make more money. I mean, that's not a good place to be in. If I'm Jim Phillips and I'm hearing Mac Brown say that on a podium, if Mac Brown says that, if Dabo Swinney says that, I need to listen. And I still feel like if the Pac and the ACC have a conversation, and I told people this before, there's like a backing into the SEC thing that I don't know if the ACC sees. And I'm going to say it publicly and be like, hey, Jim Phillips, because I think I love Jim. I love, so many things that he brings to the table. Jim and ACC, hear me on this. If you open up your contract talks and your TV rights, and because you have that grant of rights till 2036, if you open up the conversation and you break a contract or dissolve a contract to speak with the Pac-12 about their future, whatever, I think that there could be, in the legislative world, if you open up those rights to have that conversation, that could open up your grant of rights to blowing things up. And I think that the SEC is kind of waiting for the ACC to make a bad chess move and to be looking in one direction and not the other. And then essentially are going to put themselves in a position where they may say, okay, you know what, let's open these contract talks over here. So then you dissolve this over here and you break that open. And now Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and so on and so forth, the SEC can talk to them without having to worry about the grant of rights. So I think the ACC has to be really careful with what contracts they dissolve and what contracts they're opening themselves up to, because there could be a loophole situation where you back into the SEC by accident. There's also something else we heard, Dodd, about, and this is something I didn't know before this year, that if the majority of the ACC schools say that they want to leave, they can break the grant of rights by majority rule. So allegedly, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, FSU, Miami, Florida State, or pardon me, I said that already, Clemson. So, and then I think they have, what is it? Clemson, Florida State, Miami, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, and NC State. So they had 7. If they could get one other school, be it a Louisville, they can break the grant of rights on the ACC, which we have been told up until now was unbreakable. So what are your thoughts on either them opening their conversation television talks and backing into the SEC by accident, or a majority rule saying we're going to dissolve the grant of rights because 8 of us are considering leaving?
Well, yeah, no, both those situations are definitely in play. We saw that during the ACC spring meetings. All the news coming out from there about how fun of a situation that was while Dabo was on a safari in South Africa. So both of those situations are definitely in play. But I think you have a third option that people aren't talking as much, and the third option is these schools say we're leaving, and you can take us to court. And they wait for this to play out in court. We know how long legal situations like that take to play out. And if a legal process takes 3 or 4 years, is the ACC even going to be able to have the money to fight it in court?
Right.
In this situation, if they have if four of those schools leave. If Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and North Carolina leave, does the ACC have the gumption? Do they have the funds to be able to fight that in court? But the other thing is, you never know what's going to happen when you take that before a judge. Is a judge going to look at this TV contract that limits these schools to making half as much as the SEC is going to make? Are they going to be able to look at that and say that the conference is acting in the best interest of their schools?
Right.
It's hard for me to think that a judge would look at that on paper and say that the ACC is acting in the best interest of all of its institutions, with a grant of rights that locks you in until 2036. That may have been. It's going to be interesting if that does happen or when it happens. If what people are going to look back and say about John Swofford and the grant of rights deal, which seemed like when the ACC made it was a good deal, that it was going to keep these schools together. I mean, when it happened, there weren't a lot of people who were saying that this is a bad deal. Most people were saying that it was a good deal. But in 2036, is the conference even going to be in play? Is it going to exist in the same way that it does? Is it going to be in the second tier of college football? It's going to be interesting to say. I'm also glad that you brought up the Olympic sports, because that is a variable that gets left out of this conversation, and not as much for what the Olympic sports. I don't think it's as complicated what it means for the Olympic sports in the Big Ten or the SEC. If they continue expanding and they're making all this money, I think that they're going to have enough money in the budget to be able to pay for those schools to travel still, or they'll be playing in pods, regional pods, at that point if expansion continues. But what's it going to mean in that second tier? It's going to look a heck of a lot like it does in the FCS, or like it does in Division II, or like it does in the Group of Five at that point. When your revenue is so much less than these other conferences, you're going to have to super regionalize in order to keep those things afloat. So it's interesting how it's going to play off. But I think the biggest thing in that conversation is that third option for these ACC schools. Are they just going to go and say, let's see where the chips fall?
Yeah.
So
we'll see. That's what somebody else had said to me. They said, listen, I mean, if they just decide to leave and they say fight us in court, do they, how much money do they have and how much time do they want to spend on it? And at the end of the day, if these schools don't want to be with you, right, can are you really just going to force them to stay? But I mean, Alex, did you think that you or I, when we met years and years, almost a decade ago, did you think that we would ever be talking about an ACC that maybe could not exist at some point?
No, I mean, I think it was really hard to fathom that during the last. I mean, because when you and I met was right after the ACC had made this big move to add Syracuse and Louisville and kind of Notre Dame. That was around the time period that we met. So I think at that point the ACC had made a good move. They were on the offensive, and now it seems like the ACC has moved from that offensive category to the defensive category. And you bring up Jim Phillips. I'm watching the ACC football kickoff while it's going on last week, and I mean it really. And last year the same thing during the Commissioners Forum. It seemed like Jim Phillips was living in an alternate reality with what he was saying from the podium. When you get up and sing Kumbaya, and it's publicly reported that it's not that friendly in those meetings, or not even that it's not friendly. I'm sure all those guys like each other, but that all of these other things are happening behind the scenes. And it's been reported. People know that it's happening, that the schools are going to the conference office to review the grant of rights. It's been reported. We know that this is a thing. So it's interesting when Jim Phillips gets up, and it's great to talk about all the championships that the ACC won in Olympic sports. I think it's awesome. I love Olympic sports. I love softball. I love watching soccer. Syracuse has had a lot of success in soccer. I think they just came out with the poll today, and Syracuse was in the preseason soccer poll was ranked number 1. But I love the Olympic sports.
Yeah.
But I mean, you got to address reality at some point from that podium. And it was just interesting to hear what he had to say. I mean, last year he was talking about the gated communities, and then this year, I don't even understand what reality he was talking about when he stood up at the podium.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, like I said, you know, I definitely, I appreciate his faith, and I appreciate, the man behind, the man that
Yeah,
that I've met and I've gotten to talk to, one on one. At the same juncture, when I look at last year and I look at this year, I had this same statement last year that I had this year going into the ACC kickoff. My statement last year was the worst action is inaction. My
yeah.
statement this year is the worst action is inaction. And I asked him that, and there's going to be a one-on-one conversation between myself and the commissioner that'll be airing next week on Wake Up Call, where I address that with him. Are we looking at expanding with the Big 12, the Pac-12, the SEC, and the Big 10 either being poached from or poaching or both? You're the only conference in the alleged Power Five that hasn't made a move. Was that the right decision? And because I think they should have went for. Now, I don't want the American to lose anybody. If they were going to, I think the ACC should have went after UCF. I mean, there's certain things that I think would have made sense for the ACC to do. They didn't do those things. And so, now we're in a place where I really honestly do think the worst action is inaction. It's kind of this like, what are we we're just kind of watching everybody else, you know what I mean? And I don't now I understand you have the grant of rights, but when you're just watching, I think the way that you try and pull things in and do things, I mean, look at what the American Athletics doing. They have a contract with ESPN, right? And something comes up, and they're negotiating, and they're trying to build more. And now they have an opportunity to build again, and they're bringing in these 6 institutions. The American Athletic has as many schools as the ACC. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's the same pedigree as Clemson or the North Carolinas and this and that, but I'm looking at the region of the American Athletic Conference. American Athletic Conference is in Alabama. They're all over Texas. They're in Florida. They have gone into Carolina. There's all of these places that they're taking that are in the same it's the same model as the SEC plus Navy and Temple. They're taking those same states. They're taking big time markets. They lost Houston, they gained Rice. They still have Houston, Texas. They have Charlotte, North Carolina. They have a place in Alabama now in Birmingham. There's and the cities that they're in, like the Charlottes and the Houstons, are some of the fastest growing cities in America. The American Athletic is very strategic in what they've done. I'm and the Sun Belt has made some strategic moves. So I'm looking at the ACC saying, what's the strategy? What's the plan? What are you going to do? Because I think that it's clear with the college football playoff, well, at least at 4, that they have no interest in anybody coming out of the ACC that's not named Clemson. I think if Wake Forest went undefeated in recent history, I think they still would have tried to argue them out. Small school, not going to sell a lot of tickets for us. I don't think we can do it. Now, is that fair to Dave Clawson? Absolutely not. Is it fair to the Demon Deacons? Absolutely not. But I think the College Football Playoff Committee has made very clear their stance. If it ain't Big Ten or the SEC or it's not named Clemson or Notre Dame, guess what, honey? Maybe we'll put you in, but we're going to leave you down the line a little bit. And when they expand to 12, the American will hopefully have a spot. But I don't know if expanding to 12 is going to give the ACC anything more than Clemson. I don't know. I don't know in the last 10 years, and I never thought I'd say this ever. The SEC was here, and I thought the ACC was pushing right under it when I started covering the ACC a decade ago. Very, closely. What the ACC was and what they are right now is they went from being one of the top conferences, top 2 maybe, to now being in a place where I wonder if the ACC is even in the discussion when the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the SEC sit down in this in this autonomy group. I wonder if they're even calling the Pac-12 and the ACC to come to lunch and have that meeting.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. And the other thing is, if we think about the reasons why Jim Phillips was brought in as the next commissioner of the ACC, a big one was his Notre Dame ties, probably the biggest one. And he made it clear again this year. I think everybody already knew at this point that Notre Dame option looks less and less viable every year.
Oh yeah.
In terms of the ACC being aggressive instead of passive in this realignment conversation. So that was why he was brought in. That was what the presidents and chancellors wanted from Jim Phillips, was to go get Notre Dame. He has ties to the school. He has good relationships with them. He's been there. That was the reason. And now it's becoming more and more clear that that's not going to happen. And you wonder what moves would actually benefit the revenue conversation.
Yeah.
At this point, the big revenue schools, unless you're going to go get somebody from the SEC or the Big Ten, which isn't going to happen, the big revenue schools are, I mean, they're pretty much off the table unless you can go raid the Pac-12 as it's in its disaster of a situation, which I think the Pac-12 situation is worse than the ACC's at this point.
Oh yeah.
But who knows what's going to happen in another year or two? It could be in the same boat. But I mean, signing a TV deal with the CW, adding a revenue share, eliminating divisions. Yeah, these are all good things. I think the schools are happy with it, but how much is that going to do to keep those schools from looking for ways to get out of the grant of rights? I don't think a lot.
No, and I think ultimately, with the SEC becoming so big, I think that they're going to go to 20. If not, they're going to go to 18. And Florida State, Clemson, South Carolina is going to disappear because they have way too many teams already. I don't think we're going to see those matchups anymore unless they join the SEC, because the SEC really doesn't have to play non-conference games anymore. I mean, their games that they're going to have within their conference itself, they don't have. There's teams they're not going to see for years. And so,
Yeah.
To me, I feel like they have to, Florida State. And listen, I don't think Florida State's off the table. I don't think Clemson's off the table. I don't think Miami is off the table. North Carolina would be strange, but it was also strange when Mac Brown was very clear. And like I said in my response, money. We need more money. We have to find ways to make more money. I'm looking at the money. What is the conference going to do to get the money? And that sat with me in a certain type of way, because I feel like when you talk about being in that ACC room and having those conversations, a Mac Brown in that room probably holds a lot of weight. And I would venture to say that your Carolinian schools, this conference has been built from the inside out, and there's a lot of emphasis always on the North Carolina schools and then obviously Clemson. So I think at this point, I think Florida State and Miami, they're free agents. And I do believe that. If Clemson were to leave, then that's the death to me of the ACC. I mean, there's no other way to get in. You start to drop off in a way. I mean, Syracuse, where are they going to go, right? Pitt can be somewhat enticing to a Big Ten because of Pitt and Penn State, and because Pitt sends a bunch of guys to the NFL, and Pitt's a lot better than people give him credit for. Pat Narduzzi's been a great coach in 8 years. Well, this being his 8th. So, I think Pitt has some value to it of the teams that could remain. I think, I think a Wake Forest, it behooves them to stay. It behooves the NC State to stay. But, we're looking at schools that can go elsewhere, and there's a bunch of those schools that I think are going to be able to find a way. And I think the Big 12 could make a play for Virginia and say, hey, you know what? We need some help in basketball. Tony Bennett's a fantastic coach. I mean, we could have Kansas and Virginia in the same conference. So, I think the ACC has to really understand that this whole stand pat and wait is not going to work out, because I think eventually one of these conferences is going to turn their sights to you and say, okay, we've eaten everybody else. We're still hungry. And the ACC, like you said, if you're not on the offensive, you're on the defensive. The ACC was this giant that just grabbed the Big East, ripped it apart, and pulled from it whatever it wanted. The ACC looked untouchable. Now the ACC looks like the opposite. They look like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Rocket Raccoon, cowling in that cage, seeing that giant hand of realignment reaching out for them right now.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the case. And I think Clemson and Florida State, there's a special relationship that's been formed, particularly over the Grant of Rights, that these are two schools with similar interests.
Yeah.
They bring championships and revenue to the conference in a way that other schools don't at the moment. So I think there's a special relationship there. So I would be shocked if whatever happens, if those two schools aren't in lockstep, if Clemson and Florida State don't move as one into whatever the next venture is. I also about the rivalry conversation. I was talking to somebody about this last week. To me, it seems like, obviously during the COVID year, the SEC opted to play the conference only schedule, and I think that after that the SEC understood that there's still value to those rivalry games. There's also another part of this conversation with the SEC and not adding an additional game to the conference schedule, that they want Disney and ESPN to ante up for that other game. So I think that it seems like they do see value in those regional rivalry games. I mean, I couldn't imagine a world where Clemson and South Carolina don't play every year. Now, I could imagine a world in conference realignment where Clemson and South Carolina play in week 1 instead of playing in week 12. That is not out of the realm of possibility that happens.
Yeah.
Or that Florida and Florida State, same thing. That seems very much in the realm of possibility to me. But I couldn't imagine a world where those schools don't play each other. And I think if it comes to a point where these rivalry games aren't being able to be played, which we've already reached that point in a lot of places, but now some of them are coming back. I mean, even with the moves the SEC made, they brought back some traditional rivalries, Texas A&M, namely. But I don't see a world where those games don't happen. And maybe that's painful optimism on my part. But, Clemson and Florida State, I think they're in lockstep. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I mean, this is stuff that could happen in 3 weeks. It could happen in 3 years. It could happen in 2036. Yeah. But I think if you wait until 2036, the landscape is going to be so different that you're going to be left behind.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think, like we talked about, I think the grant of rights was meant to provide a level of protection that other conferences don't have. But I think what you've realized is you might have as much as great of a fortress as you think you have built, but if the people within the castle don't want to be there, as great as that fortress is, what is it if the people within that fortress are not looking to be protected from the rest of the world but want to actually go out into it? So I mean, this is kind of like Rapunzel, right? Are Clemson and Florida State letting down their hair, saying, "Let me out of this castle, get me out of this place"? So, we shall see. But before I let you go, Alex Dodd here with me and the sports editor, very proud to be able to say that in Rapid City for the Rapid City Journal. Before I let you go, the ACC preseason poll came out. This is the first time we're seeing the ACC sans division since they had this giant realignment here and over the last decade, right? So as we look at this, I do want to remind everybody that a few years ago, if there were no divisions, Clemson and Syracuse would have played for the ACC championship. But as we look at it right now, Clemson was voted number 1 in the preseason poll. Spoiler alert, everybody. I'm sure you didn't know that was coming. Florida State was number 2, which I prognosticated. North Carolina, number 3. Interesting. NC State, number 4. Miami, even though they fumbled the ball the last couple of years, they were voted number 5. Tied for 6th, Duke and Pitt. So Pitt gaining some traction and respect here. Louisville, who has a new head coach, and they've been kind of wobbly. They got 8. Wake Forest got 9. And Syracuse got 10. Virginia Tech 11. Georgia Tech 12. Boston College 13. Virginia 14, as Virginia has lost their quarterback and over the last couple seasons also lost their offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. So what are your thoughts on the preseason poll, where I don't think we're surprised in 1 and 2, but there's a lot of other pieces to this media poll where I'm going, yeah, I don't think we agree on that.
Yeah, no, probably. Yeah, I agree with you. Number 1 and number 2 are what I thought. Now, I thought maybe that gap would be a little bit shorter, just with the way that people have talked about Florida State in this offseason. I thought maybe that gap between Clemson and Florida State would be a little bit more narrow. I mean, in terms of points, it is, but in terms of first place votes, it's really not. But I thought maybe it would be a little tighter there. And the one that surprises me the most on this list is probably Pitt, tied for sixth. I think a lot of people in the ACC are going to be surprised by Pitt this year. And I'm not sure why people are going to be surprised, because if you watch Pitt last year, it's not like there was this massive drop off after Kenny Pickett and those guys left. I mean, Pitt was still Pitt last year. They were not too far out of the conversation of being in that ACC championship game. And I think they're going to be better this year. Obviously, they lose Abanikanda, and he's a heck of a running back. But they bring a lot of pieces back off that team. And Pat Narduzzi, if he's done one thing at Pitt in his tenure there, is be consistent. So I would be shocked if Pitt actually finishes sixth in the conference. I could see Pitt. I can see a universe, and I talked about this last week with Will Vandervoort, that I can see a world where Pitt ends up in the ACC championship game instead of Florida State. That doesn't seem like – that wouldn't shock me. I wouldn't be scratching my head wondering how Pitt was able to do it. Florida State's got to go there, and they've got to go to Clemson. So Pitt has some schedule advantages that I think they could end up in that championship game. The bottom of the conference, I feel like the gap between these teams from 8 to 11 in particular, I feel like that gap between those teams isn't that much. But Wake Forest ninth, with everything that Dave Clawson's been able to do at Wake Forest,
nobody respect. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, but a lot of people just don't respect it, and it drives me nuts because
this isn't your daddy's Wake Forest team.
No, he's been there for a decade, and I mean, I don't understand what else he has to do.
I know Sam Hartman's gone, and Sam Hartman is a heck of a quarterback, and I think he's going to do great things at Notre Dame. But man, it's just hard for me to see Pitt at sixth and Wake Forest at ninth in these standings.
Agreed.
NC State getting a first place vote too is a little interesting. I mean, it's not as crazy as, if somebody would have voted Louisville to win the conference. It's not that crazy. But NC State to get a first place vote, I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think Dave Doran gets the respect he deserves. I don't know why. I've become like a speaker on behalf of NC State and Wake Forest because I don't get it. I think Pitt gets disrespect in the conference because this conference is filled with majority media coming from the Carolinas, and I just don't think that they research Pitt. I don't feel like people know information on Pitt. I remember sitting at a table with people 2 years in Eric Dungy being a quarterback, people asking me if he was good at all. And I was like, can you watch a game of Syracuse? Like any game. Pick a game. I mean, when they stink, he's great. When they're good, he's still great. When he's injured, they're horrible. And, Syracuse being 10th, I guess I can hang my hat on the fact that my hometown wasn't picked 14th this year or 13th, as would be the.
But Syracuse has a ton of weapons coming back this year.
Right.
Obviously at the quarterback position, but the wide receiver room there. Dino we trust, right? I mean, everybody loves Dino. And the way that he's been able to navigate this roster management piece has been interesting to watch because, there's so much turnover that happens at a school like Syracuse, but Dino's found a way to make it work, to put the pieces together to be competitive. Syracuse went to the Valley, and man, Clemson was a dog's hair away from losing that game.
More than once. Yeah,
multiple times.
If Syracuse has played any team well since joining the ACC, outside of the first few years, let's say like the last 4-5 years, Clemson. They played Clemson well in Death Valley. They played Clemson well at home. They beat Clemson when they were the reigning national champion, ranked second in the country. So, you're looking at this list, Clemson, Florida State. Yeah, obviously I agree with that. North Carolina, I think that Pitt, I think that Miami, I think that NC State, I think arguably potentially Wake Forest. could climb up that chart above North Carolina this season. I look at Louisville in the middle. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think Wake
Don't
Forest.
either.
I think Wake Forest below Louisville and below Duke, and arguably below Miami and NC State. I don't I don't get the we don't need to cover Wake Forest. We don't need to care about Wake Forest. Dave Clawson can't get it done. I don't understand the mentality of it. And so, I mean, them being at number 9 when I can argue them to 3 through 5 doesn't make sense to me. Virginia Tech, Brent Pry, we'll see what he can do there. And I do believe that he is building something. I think in Virginia, with Tony Elliott, I mean, you don't never underestimate a team that's gone through something tragic together. I mean, there's something to be said about the energy and the uplifting that can come out of something terrible, something beautiful being born out of that. So I don't think I would have put Virginia. I mean, I don't put Virginia 14th in mine. And Boston College, Jeff Healy, I mean, he's done some, or Jeff Hafley, pardon me, he's done some good things too with that team. So, I mean, I know you got to put somebody at the bottom, but outside of 1 and 2, I think that Pitt got disrespected in the preseason poll. I think that Wake Forest got disrespected. I think in maybe some respects here with Syracuse, they got disrespected as to being a double-digit team here at number 10, where I think that they're going to end above that. And I think that, again, this conference has really leaned on North Carolina and Miami. And in the last couple of years, I mean, with Miami, we, the ACC media's majority has thought Miami's going to be good, and they disappointed. And they also thought that about North Carolina and Mac Brown, and there's a drop-off last year too. So I think it's like, when push comes to shove, pick the teams you're used to picking. And I think that Pitt and Wake Forest and some of these other teams are kind of been left on the cutting room floor to a media poll where I think sometimes people go chalk and they just keep saying, okay, Miami didn't do it last year or the year before, but they're going to do it this year, instead of finally saying the Wake Forest deserves it.
I just think you got to show me something.
Yeah.
You got to show me that you can be that team.
Right, and they have.
Yeah, I know that Miami was able to do that in 2001. But what have they been able to do since they joined the conference? I mean, they made it to the ACC championship game once and they got embarrassed. Yeah. So you got to show me. And Miami didn't show me anything last year to say that they could be this high. Now maybe this year they put all the pieces together. They were close in some games last year, but there were a lot of other games where they weren't. Yeah. I mean, they got embarrassed on their home turf by Middle Tennessee. So you got to show me before I'm going to put you this high in the poll. Some of these schools have shown me something. Some of these schools have not. I mean, Duke. We haven't even talked about Duke. I mean, I think what Mike Elko's building at Duke is something that they haven't seen since the days of Steve Spurrier being in Durham. So it is interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out on the field. I like the no divisions. Yeah. I know, a couple coaches don't, but everybody else seems to like it except for Dabo and Mac Brown. But I get it. I get why somebody wouldn't like it, but I'm excited for it to see what happens when we come around in December.
Yeah, and so we shall see as we step forward here, kicking off the college football season in the ACC. Speaking on a lot of big topics here with Alex Dodd, I think we covered more in an hour's time than maybe the NCAA has covered in a couple of years. So with that being said, Dodd, Rapid City
Low
Journal,
bar.
Rapid City Journal, big shout out to you, and being the sports editor, shout out to your show that you've started here off the cuff as well. And definitely always look forward to having you back whenever we can do that.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Dan. Always good to be on the program.
All right, man. Be well and God bless as always.
Absolutely. You too.
Take care. That coming here from Alex Dodd on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, where sports truly meets that thing called life. We covered a lot there. That was, see, conversations like that, there's meat, right? There's so much meat to the conversation. And that's what, to me, that's what my show is all about. It's about providing the meat for the sandwich, right? We go to some places where they make you a sub, and there's what's up, Will? How are you, sir? Good to hear from you here on the feed. God bless. Hope you and the family are doing well. Can't wait to see you. some places you go and you get a sub and there's more bread than meat. Well, on Wake Up Call, we're all about filling that sandwich and giving you your money's worth. We're putting that meat in the sandwich, right? We're not putting little tiny slabs. No, we're filling it up like an Italian family. We're making sure you got enough meat that if half of it falls out, you got sandwiches for a week. That's what Wake Up Call is, the meat of the sandwich. We'll take a step aside for our final fast break, wrap up the show right after this. Where sports meets life on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. Thanks for being with us. Avicoli's, located on the corner of Route 57 and Wetzel Road in Liverpool, New York, has been your trusted neighbor for decades. Located just steps from Liverpool High School, we're happy to have the Liverpool Warriors on-site, on-location broadcast at Avicoli's through Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora every single month, featuring student athletes, coaches, and administration throughout the year from Liverpool High School. Head out to Avicoli's today on the corner of Route 57 and Wetzel Road in Liverpool, New York, open Tuesday through Sunday for lunch, dinner, and drinks. We'd love to see you out there. And of course, you can call them at 315-622-5100 for takeout, delivery, and catering. That's 315-622-5100. And also find them on myavicolis.com. That's myavicollis.com. Having peace of mind when you're out of town that your furry-loving friend is safe and sound means taking them to Canine Campground, because we all know that when it comes to the love of our pets, it goes well beyond the call of duty to make sure they're safe and sound. Right, Lily? So take a ride to 242 Johnson Street in East Syracuse, New York, and see Canine Campground and where your dog will be staying in the classic cabin, the executive cabin, the grand cabin, or of course the luxury cabin, because if you know Lily, you know she loves luxury. Now you don't have to wait to the last minute to find a family member or a friend that'll take your dog for a few days. Call Canine Campground at 315-299-4013. That's 315-299-4013. Their drop-off and pickup times are Monday through Sunday. Check K9campground.com for more information. That's the letter K, the number 9, and campground spelled with a K.com. K9campground.com.
When you're going out of town, bring your dog to Canine Campground.
PB&J's Lunchbox, the food truck that you love finding all throughout Central and Upstate New York, now has a street-side cafe. So when you're craving their traditional favorites as well as their out-of-box amazing menu items, you can now head to 663 Old Liverpool Road in Liverpool, New York. Located just minutes from the highway, the Thruway, Destiny USA, and Onondaga Lake Parkway, PB&J's Lunchbox Street-Side Cafe is there for you Monday through Saturday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner all throughout the day. Get breakfast for dinner, dinner for lunch, whatever you fancy, including their award-winning grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Find them at 663 Old Liverpool Road in Liverpool, New York. PB&J's Lunchbox, where we love to know what's in your lunchbox. This is a special message from 317 at Montgomery restaurant owner Joel Carpenter. Open Tuesday through Saturday for your dining pleasure on 317 Montgomery Street in Syracuse, New York.
We wanted to be a part of the resurgence of Syracuse. We saw a lot of money being put into bringing people back downtown and thought that, we'd like to be a part of that. I love putting together a good dish where people see it first, they fall in love with it, and then it tastes just as good as it looks. We want to provide the best food in Syracuse that we possibly can, and we want you to leave here talking to your family, your friends about what you had to eat first and foremost, but also our service, and to walk out feeling like you're part of our family. I work out in the front of the house a lot, and I love walking to every single table, asking them how everything is, and people looking at me and smiling and saying, this is the most amazing short rib I've ever had. This is the most amazing filet I've ever had. And Donna is great. Sarah's amazing. Thank you for coming over and talking to us. And then them just being truly happy for the experience that they've gotten.
317 at Montgomery Restaurant, part of the fabric of downtown Syracuse, located on 317 Montgomery Street in Syracuse, New York. Open Tuesday through Saturday for a unique and memorable dining experience. Welcome back here to Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. Appreciate you so very much for being here with us every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Time on YouTube.com, Facebook.com, and YouTube.com and Facebook.com, both /WakeUpCallDT and on WakeUpCallDT.podbean.com. Much appreciation for that. Once we go live, to jump into the archives on Amazon Music, Audible, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts. MixLR, Player FM, Podbean, Podvine, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, YouTube, as well as Boomplay and Podchaser. You could search Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora, or one word, Wake Up Call DT, and catch all of our shows, over 1,600 episodes, by going to your favorite podcasting platform. Big thanks to our incredible partners that you've heard throughout the show: Carvel DeWitt, the Wildcat Sports Pub, 317 at Montgomery Street, Great Lakes Honda City, Chick-fil-A Cicero and Chick-fil-A Clay, Pizza Man, Canine Camp Dog Daycare, Mother's Cupboard, PB&J's Lunchbox, GG Cards and Breaks, Canine Campground Dog Boarding, Chick-fil-A Watertown, Avicoli's. Thank you to all of our fantastic, and MON-FRI Kettle Corn Popcorn Factory, if I didn't say them. Thank you to all of our fantastic partners in Central and Upstate New York. Of course, we are the exclusive multimedia marketing partner of your Lemoyne College Dolphins. It's Fins Up every single month on Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. You could check out your Dolphins here during Dolphin Time on Wednesdays, like today at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. First and third Wednesday, we bring you AD and DT with Athletics Director Bob Beretta and myself, Dan Tortora. Second, fourth Wednesday of each month, we bring you the Dolphin Dive, diving into the stories of student athletes, coaches, administration, future Dolphins, and alumni. Don't miss a second with the Dolphins by going to our Lemoyne tab on WakeUpCallDT.com and by subscribing to YouTube.com/WakeUpCallDT. For more information on your Dolphins, go to LemoyneDolphins.com, and as always, Fins Up. The Bryan and Stratton College Bobcats of Syracuse bring you the Bobcat Buzz in our exclusive multimedia marketing partnership with the Bobcats of Bryan and Stratton College of Syracuse. Every single month, you have the opportunity to hear from student athletes, coaches, and administration at Bryan and Stratton College of Syracuse. A unique experience for student athletes and students alike, right there on James Street in Syracuse, just outside of downtown Syracuse. The Bobcat Buzz coming to you every single month. We got a great one coming up this Friday with Tay Baker, the head coach of the women's basketball team, following a bunch of his recruiting messages. A great student athletes coming in to help out his team move forward. The Bobcat Buzz can be found on the BSC Syracuse tab on WakeUpCallDT.com by subscribing to YouTube.com/WakeUpCallDT. And for more information, go to Syracuse.bscbobcats.com. Go Bobcats. The Alfred University Saxons are exclusive multimedia marketing partners with Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora. The Saxons come to you every first and third Monday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time during Saxon Time for your presidential perspective, featuring President of Alfred University, Mark Zupan. We just talked about the Saxon Hill Complex, expansion of the student athlete and student experience and fan experience. So you can check that out by going to youtube.com/WakeUpCallDT. Every second and fourth Monday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. The Saxon Spotlight comes to you with student athletes, coaches, and administration joining me from the Saxons family to tell their incredible stories. So many great things we've already gotten to do with the Saxons. It's hard to believe that we have worked just 1 month with the Alfred University Saxons, and we have already had incredible stories from wonderful guests that make it feel like we've already done months and months of work with the Alfred University Saxons. I want to thank their leadership team for believing in me and believing in what we do at Dan Tortora Broadcast Media and at Wake Up Call. And I am so excited for everything we're going to be able to do as we have hit the ground running and had a fantastic time with the Saxons already. You can check out their content by going to the Alfred U tab on wakeupcalldt.com. And of course, by subscribing to youtube.com/wakeupcalldt. For more information, go to gosaxons.com. And as the website says, go Saxons. Many thanks to my guest here from Lemoyne College, Athletics Director Bob Beretta, in our monthly series AD and DT. Many thanks to my guests from Syracuse football, head football coach Dino Babers, defensive back Justin Barron, and wide receiver Damian Elford. And of course, many thanks to the Rapid City Journal's newest sports editor, that being my guy, Mr. Alex Dodd, speaking on college football's conundrum, as well as the ACC in the present and the ACC potentially in the future, and hoping that the ACC can navigate this very unique world that we live in right now, and hopefully things can work out in their favor, as I appreciate, respect, and thank the ACC for all the work that they've done. I hope that things can hopefully be looking up here for the ACC as we step forward. So big thanks to Alex Dodd, to Syracuse football, and of course to Bob Beretta and Lemoyne College. We'll talk with you very soon on Wake Up Call. In the meantime, find us on social media at WakeUpCallDT on Facebook, at CallDT on Twitter, and at WakeUpCall_DT on Instagram. God bless. No stress. Do your best. Don't ever let anybody take you away from who you are. Do the best you can, and understand that that's all you need to do. It is not your responsibility to do somebody else's job. It's not your responsibility to have to live somebody else's life. Do the absolute best you can and trust in the Lord that everything comes out in the wash, and He's always got your back. I love you, God. Thank you for everything. Have a good day.